What's my work about? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's about opening to the mystery, about releasing everything we think we know, and about an exploration of these two qualities through the physical, through the interior, through the mind, and really through reality as a whole. My name's Craig Mallett, and welcome to the Aware, Relaxed, Connected podcast. Today, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time going into some detail of this idea of condensation. It's an idea that I really found only prominent in the Taoist arts, at least in the way that I'm going to talk about it here. It's kind of accidentally in some other things or done in a different way. But this action I'm going to talk about, condensation, has a very specific quality to it. So when you're talking in Taoist arts, I always use like yin and yang and the five phases, five movements, five elements theory, which is called wuxing. And two of these phases, the wood phase is expansive, which is what I'm calling opening. It moves from the center out to the extremities. And the metal phase is condensing. It moves from the extremities back towards the center. And if you go on any of the wuxing diagrams you find online, if they have the feng shui logos on them in particular, you'll see the metal element just has a bunch of arrows pointing towards the center. This idea of condensation is similar to a contraction you'd find in a kind of conventional muscular sense. And of course, if you look at people like professional weightlifters and things like this, and you've got very, very dense tissues because of all the contracting they do. But this isn't quite the density that I'm talking about here, because that density is also very constricting to circulation. It's more like a squeezed fist. It kind of cuts circulation eventually, and slowly but surely the body gets stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. And with time, this can make have a negative impact on health. So the condensation in the metal element has a few associations, and one of them is letting go, releasing. And I want to talk about why and how this works today, and also then bring it back around to how it links to practice and links to how we exist in the world. So first of all, the action, it's really got this idea of compressing, condensing, bringing something together, right? You've got these arrows coming from outside to the center. And a really, really good example of this is a rain cloud. You've got a rain cloud, you've got moisture kind of spread out everywhere. And as it condenses, the moisture comes together and starts to form raindrops, which are much more dense than the rain cloud. And as the raindrops get dense enough, then they get heavy and they fall to the ground. Now, a few really interesting things happen in this condensation act. First of all, that the raindrops, instead of being vague and unable to be found anywhere, start to get a form, a shape, and along with this get position, location, and relative to the other raindrops, some sort of relationship. So, one raindrop over here, one raindrop over there. They're made of the same water from the same cloud, but they've kind of separated into dense form. As this density gets more and more dense as the raindrops condense, then at some point they get heavy enough and fall. So this is one of the ideas of the metal element, this idea of like condensation. But the interesting thing that comes with this idea is that the condensation is coming from a greater field of potential. So as a rain cloud, the water still has potential to gather up in all sorts of different ways, or move on and never gather up and things like this. Once it becomes the dense form, it's pretty much got one place to go, which is straight down. So if we look at this as another example, we can think about making a choice. I look at a menu, and there's lots and lots of items on a menu at a cafe, and at some point I condense down onto, I want that thing, and then I make my order, and it kind of goes. But the interesting thing that you have to do that condensation is let go of the other possibilities. This is one of the real keys of this, that you have to let go of other possibilities so the gathering can take place in a very specific time and place and position. Um, Now, in the biggest sense of this gathering idea, this condensation idea, can be looked at in the meta sense. You've got the universal field of open potential, where nothing's realized yet, nothing's made physical yet, nothing is dense yet. It's a non-dense form, very yang. And this field of infinite potential is condensing itself into specific realized things. So in the case of a human, this particular form, this Craig, this body with this history and this path. And as it condenses down into this form, it starts to get clarity about the form. This form is not other forms. I'm not Bob or Julie or any other person on the planet. I'm Craig. My little raindrop is formed up as a me. Your little raindrop is forming up as a you. This is the act of manifestation, actually, going from potential to actual, from insubstantial to substantial, from potential to realized potential. The thing that happens as that potential realizes is I lose the possibility of being anyone else. I have to let go of those possibilities to become me. Just as when I'm choosing from the menu, there's the wide open field of possibility when I haven't made a choice yet. And then as I choose something, I have to let go of all the other options. I have to let go of the food my friend is ordering and let go of, this and that, anything else that isn't the order I want. As this essence of this quality is practice, it actually becomes easier to release into a specific dense form. And this specific dense form, once more, will have clearer and clearer qualities the more dense it is. So as I form up as me and not you, and not what anyone else thinks I should be, and not what the world thinks I should be, and not what society thinks I should be, but just me, then I get really clear. I get clear on this is for me, this is not me. And you get a skin, right? All those little raindrops, as they're condensing in the cloud, end up with a skin, a very clear boundary. And I want to emphasize that word, that this condensation act brings a sense of boundary, because boundary does something specific. It categorizes and clarifies and separates things, right? So metal is often seen as the essence of separation, because as all the raindrops condense, of course, they separate into lots of different raindrops, just as all the people condense into form, they separate into all the different people. Now, at a bigger level, on the human level, what we're seeing today is an epidemic of a lack of this. People are unable to accept that they aren't someone else. They aren't the celebrities they see on the media. They aren't some vision of themselves, of perfection of themselves that they have. They want to stay in that field of potential where you can do anything and be anyone you set your mind to. And if you just try hard enough, you can be the best, most perfect person ever. And because they're holding on to this vision of perfection, they're unable to condense into the form they're currently taking. Whereas when you let go of, oh, I'm not those other people, you can actually form up as yourself. Now, this has got a lot of benefits. And I want to just, before I go on here, kind of just emphasize that in the Taoist systems, in the philosophy I'm using here, it's always a balanced philosophy. For all the condensing that gets done, for all the metal element that's around, you need the balancing agents. You need, wood is the opposing force. It's the opening element, which takes you out into the dream world and into the possibilities and into the potentials. But metal is the condensation of those potentials, and they work together. Metal, of course, can't be too rigid either. If it gets too rigid, it gets stuck in its form and it's unable to evolve. It's trying to remain as it was before and unable to renew itself. So there's a pliability needed too. But let's get back to the act of condensation being something like a release. When I let go of all the other possibilities, like a quantum field collapsing into this possibility, then it arrives in clear, dense form. And part of what this letting go of the other does is gives you real crystal clear clarity about who you are, who you're not, what you like, what you don't like, what you need, what you don't need, and all of these things. You're able to make choices based on what's good for the context that you're immediately in. This idea of letting yourself form up and become dense, become limited, actually. That's what we're saying here, like releasing the unlimited potentials to become limited, choosing to become limited and letting that gather together. Now, this action can be forced, like squeezing a fist, but in forcing it, you put a lot of tension through it, and that tension actually kind of ruins it in a strange way. What we're looking for more is something like a black hole. And I'm very, very rusty with all that kind of astrophysics ideas, but from what I understand about black holes is they attract matter towards them and light and all these things, and it like kind of condenses into this dense mass of no light, very like super yin, right? You can't see it, there's no light, there's no visibility, but it's super, super dense inside, and it like crushes things that go into it into oblivion. So that's roughly the idea. Or a gravity well. The idea is it's got a passive attraction towards it, that it draws things into it. And so, with a rain cloud, that example is really nice because this gathering on the rain cloud isn't like there's a force up there like pushing the raindrops together. Actually, it's like releasing out of the cloud, right? The raindrops kind of release together, and as they keep releasing together, they get dense enough until they eventually fall. This action of passive gathering of almost like a magnetic force that brings things together, that draws things together rather than having to push things together, because things are attracted to the center of the raindrop in the case of the drop, or the center of me in the case of the human. So this action is really interesting because it can't be forced. I can't force myself to condense up. What I can do is let go of everything that isn't that condensation, release it all, and let the thing gather on its own. This idea is the heart of, as far as I understand it anyway, the Dantian Gong, the building of the lower physical center in the Taoist arts, that they're really about gathering into density. And gathering together by this act of release, not an act of force. You can't really force the density to appear. You have to continuously release into the density, release it until it grows in density. And things that grow in density tend to start to generate a kind of organizational field around them. So just as the planet is super dense, as you get more and more dense in your lower center by doing this Dantian Gong, what you start to do is generate a native organizational field around you. This is sometimes called the yin field. Classically, it's kind of like a magnetic field. You think of like the magnetic field around the Earth, and anything enters that field and it's suddenly subject to the organizational capacities of that field. Things want to enter orbit around the planet, and that orbit can be stabilized because of this magnetic field. It's not going to push things away or anything like that. It has this attractive quality to it. Even, gravity that keeps us on the planet, that stops us from just stepping outside and flying off into the sky because nothing's holding us on the planet. This is that same force, right? It organizes things. The straight lines of gravity going back down to the center of the Earth, the yin field of the planet, organizes us, allows us to have structure, to have shape. If that wasn't there, all our molecules would just fly off in random directions. So this organizational field works more strongly the more dense things are. And for the human, as we build our Dantian, what this organizational field will do is it'll get stronger and stronger and start affecting, first of all, things like your physical structure. So your cellular structure, your bodily alignment will automatically line up, will start to automatically organize itself around the density and the native organizational capacity of the center. And in the mind, all the thoughts will suddenly, like satellites around this dense field, start to organize themselves as well. So you get very organized thoughts. And most importantly, most crucially, it happens natively. I do not have to manage this organizational capacity with my mind. The denser the Dantian, the more the condensation has occurred, the more this becomes a stronger native field that then amplifies itself. So you think of a strong magnetic field drawing stuff together. At some point the density builds, that field gets stronger and stronger and stronger. It attracts more to it. And so it has this kind of cumulative effect. The more you build it, the stronger it gets, the easier it is to build, because you can just, it at one point ends up being a just let go of anything that's going in there. It's like, again, it has this quality of a black hole. The only thing that's not going in there is what I'm trying to hold out of it. So all I do is release, and the stuff starts to fly together. Now I have a really, really silly but so potent image for this that helps you understand what it's all about. And to understand the image, you need to have seen a movie called Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Now, hopefully everyone's seen this movie. It is a classic of the early to mid 90s, and it's also somewhat, what's the word? Prophetic. It's AI robots taking over the world and using time travel to try and kill the humans that are trying to stop the AI. So if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. It's rather poignant at this point in time. It seems like all these AI people are genuinely trying to create that situation for us, which is very odd to me, but whatever. Anyway, at any point, if you haven't seen it, the storyline is you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's this Terminator robot, and then he comes back in time to save the main character. And you've got a second Terminator, which is made of, in the movie, they call liquid metal. He's like made of nanobots, or this metal that can turn liquid and morph and change into things. And so they have real trouble killing this bad robot, because every time they shoot him, he just like forms back together. There is one super famous scene at the end of the movie where the liquid metal man has had a truck of liquid nitrogen dumped over him, so he's all frozen, and Arnold Schwarzenegger pulls out his gun and says the famous line, "Hasta la vista, baby," and shoots him, and he shatters into a million parts. Now, these parts are like shattered, and they're like big chunks of metal that have just like spread all across this car park that's outside a refined metal refinery of some sort. So there's all this heat around. And what happens is the chunks, they think the guy's done, he's all shattered into a million bits, but the chunks slowly melt. And then as they melt, they just come back together, and they all kind of slide back together and form back up into the liquid metal man. Now, this action of the chunks releasing themselves from their chunky shape and then just like gliding back together, falling back together, they're like gathering as if by magnetic force together, is really so crucially on point about how this process of gathering in the center works. It really needs these two actions to release the shape of the distraction. So say you're doing a Dantian Gong, you're paying attention to your belly, and suddenly a thought appears. That thought is an expression of you, and we want the you part of it to go into the Dantian to gather you into density. What we don't want is the shape of it. We don't want the content of the thought, the content of the distraction. So you need to release it from that shape. So from the non-dual perspective, awareness has shaped itself into that thought form. Releasing it from that shape kind of allows it to return to pure awareness, or pure chi, if you want to think of it that way. And then you let it drop into the middle of the belly. This idea is so crucial. I think I talked about it in a past podcast, but the idea of not severing yourself from these parts of yourself that are showing up as other things, because every time that thought appears and you like push it away to get back to your center, you're not going to create density. You need to actually invite the energy from the raw energy, the pure chi or the pure awareness or whatever you want to call it, from that form into the center. Otherwise, things won't get dense. You'll never get more in the center because you're not bringing any more in. The cues for this are often to just pay attention to the center, and when there's a thought, you just release from that back to the center, which achieves this process, this goal of melting that form back to the center. And those cues also tend to help prevent you forcing things. Instead of pushing back to the center, you just release the form and then put your attention back to the center and let the energy from the form slowly go towards the center. So this is kind of a very crucial part of this process that I miss for a long time. Now, there are plenty of ways of assisting this. There's stuff you can do with your hands to help guide the released energy, the released chi, the released awareness, whatever you want to call it, back to the center. Um, but if you don't have this principle of gathering density, then you can often run in circles for a long time. So the nice thing about this principle is it works anywhere in the being. So if I have a thought appear, that's like a condensation of my being as a thought. I release it from condensing as a thought and let it fall into the center, and it joins the center and starts densing up the center, making the center more condensed. And then I have a tension in my shoulder that's bothering me. Well, I release that and let it fall into the center. And you see, as I release all these physical forms of pressure, elsewhere in the body and let them fall into the center, I'll have this kind of gathering effect. It starts to look a little bit like filling up from the inside. This gathering of density starts to fill. So if we go back to our cloud analogy, the raindrops are forming up and then they're being released. Well, think about how a dehumidifier works. There's a condensing motor in there. There's moisture in the air. That motor pulls the moisture out of the air, condenses it into a little drop, and then drops that little droplet into a reservoir below it. This is basically what we're doing with Dantian Gong as well, just dropping our energy into the little lower reservoir. And what happens if you keep dropping stuff into it, that reservoir builds, the water there gathers and gathers, and it expands, it grows, it pushes outward from in. And so you end up getting a very slow opening from inside that fills you up slowly. And this filling you up starts to give you a sense of knowing who you are and so on and so forth. So this density like slowly spreads to fill the body until it fills out to the fingers and to the head and fills all the gaps in the body with chi, essentially what the medical term would call wei chi, the guardian chi. When the guardian chi gets dense and full, you have a being that has no spare space for anything to go in. A being that is very clear where it is in space. You'll know your location very clearly, where you are, where you're going, and you'll have a sense of security because you are full. You're full of yourself, not full of ideas from someone else, not full of society's projections onto you, not full of your parents' opinion of what they think you should have been when you grow up, full of you, full of yourself, but in the very, very positive sense of this term, that you occupy yourself completely and in a dense way. This denseness will give you such clarity that you'll know that you need this and you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't guarantee that you're perfect, but it gives a real sense of know thyself, the limited part of ourself. It makes it super clear. It makes you super relaxed because you feel very comfortable and safe when you're full. Things like, if you want to get really esoteric, entity possession disappear. There's no space for entities to come in. It's all full of your condensed form. Your wei chi is filling you up. There's no space for your friend's stupid opinion about what you should do to go in. And so none of those things can possess you. None of those things can occupy you. It doesn't mean you don't interact with them. Of course, your friend can say something, you can consider it and act on it or not. But that action will come from a place of real grounding. Now, this is also part of the embodiment aspect of these. Without the metal element, you lose your sense of self, you lose your clarity of who am I. You have to start referring to the world around you to work out who you are. You go to a cafe and you go to order and you just ask everyone else what they're getting. What are you getting? Okay, I'll choose based on that. And that always happens when there's not enough density. As soon as the density increases, you start going, well, I just want that. And you get the thing you want and it's easy. Again, as you've practiced this, like releasing into specific form, it also makes things like making decisions very easy because you consider all the possibilities and then you go, right, we're releasing into that possibility. And it doesn't even end up forced. It's just like, yeah, we're going that way. And you release in that direction and you let your reality condense into the actions based on that decision. And then you go. So this condensation process also itself is inherently valuable. If you can release into specific decision, release into specific form as a being, release into specific direction, then you can go. All of these things get much, much easier when you don't have to force it, when you've worked out how to let it soften into this particular form. From an esoteric perspective as well, things like manifestation become much easier because you've practiced taking something etheric, a concept, a possibility. I really wanted to stay sunny on my workshop, and you've got the essence of releasing that into manifest form, into dense form, and you let that principle release into form, and then it appears, and you have a nice sunny workshop, and it's all good. So, for things like magical practices, this is amazing. It will actually save you so much time stuffing around with trying to manage things into the form, because you can just release it into the form. And if you've done it 100 gajillion times inside your body, it's not that hard to translate into other aspects of your life. So this idea of releasing into dense form carries to things like that as well. But coming back to the individual, which is more interesting to me, who cares about changing the weather? I'm really noticing how much this can do things like stabilize a person's crazy mind. So all this stuff with like ADD and attention deficit disorder, from my view, is actually a condensation deficiency. There's not enough condensation. Um, and this condensation act, which again is linked to the metal element in the whooshing, in the 5 phases diagram, has a lot of links. One of the links it has is to the Po, to the corporeal soul, this instinctual part of us, the part of us that needs, wants us to survive and wants us to sleep well and wants us to have a good circadian rhythm and so on and so forth. Interestingly, what happens when we get more full in ourselves and more dense in ourselves, we lose this need to perpetually try and feed ourselves with stuff, because that need is coming from a recognition of a lack of density. There's emptiness inside. And so I need to stuff something in. I need to consume media, or I need to consume whatever it is, if you're weird pedo elite people, apparently it's small babies, whatever. The problem is the same at every level, that there's this hunger to fill because there is no density inside. And so that hunger disappears as you get more condensed and more condensed and more condensed. And instead of battling this hunger and like batting that one away and trying to find a different one, you just fill up to the point where there's no need to put that stuff in, and you can just reduce to like eating stuff that's just enjoyable for you, and like not eating out of boredom or things like this. So the Po gets very healthy. It gets very regulated by this density. It stops acting up, essentially. It stops searching frantically and maniacally for stuff to fill it, because it already feels full. It already feels dense. And this, I really can't emphasize how much this can change some people's life. And even not even going into like the advanced forms of this, like internal alchemy, where you condense the center so much that microcosmic orbit wakes up and things like this. Even before this, even going into some simple levels of density, you can change your life. I've got students who have all sorts of like lifelong chaos in their mind. They meditated until the cows come home and nothing seems to work. And then suddenly we just do a bit of condensing, and already within weeks, some of those problems are easing off. And if they stick at it in the long term, of course, if they keep a consistent practice, then they feel and they feel and they feel, and things just get easier because there's density. And because there's density, the panic kind of disappears. Because there's density, there's anchoring. The other metaphor I really like to use to this, and to bring it back around to how it relates to its opposite, which is the wood element and the fire and so on, the yang side of things, is to compare it to a parachute. So opening practices like meditation, any kind of release practice that takes you into sparsity, where I release myself and I lose sense of myself. Am I the room? Am I the forest? Am I the other people? I don't know. I keep releasing until it all becomes very sparse. I do Zen meditation and release into the spaciousness of the wide open ground, of the void. All these practices are opening inherently, and they take us out of density. And this is like a parachute, the top of the parachute, the canopy of the parachute. The density is the bottom of the parachute, the cargo of the parachute, where the person would sit in a parachute or in a paraglider. This density actually brings stability. So if you think of a parachute, but it doesn't have a load, it doesn't have someone sitting in it, what's going to happen? Maybe it'll like kind of hang out if there's no wind, but as soon as there's like the little gust, the parachute just goes and like flaps in every direction and just gets taken with the gust and goes everywhere. In my observation, this is exactly what the entire New Age crowd constantly suffer from, and they constantly search for new ways to try and meditate and open the parachute more so it'll be stable. But there's no stability is ever going to come from that. What you need is the density, the load at the bottom that will draw the sails down into form. It will organize them. When that load sits in the parachute, it actually pulls it down, and then the chute can sail on the winds. Of course, just condensing has its problems. If I don't have the opening to go with it, all I have is a load, it falls to the ground, it doesn't move anywhere, can't ride any winds, and you get stagnant, you don't move. So it needs to be balanced, but we've really got like an epidemic of a lack of density at the moment. All of education in the modern sector is pushing kids into their mind as much as possible. Think about things, think about things, think about things. That's just opening up into the mental spheres. No density at all in there. And even the way most people are doing physical exercises are occupying the mind and kind of looking down at the body and condensing. Doing this in like a conventional way can work. If you take my example of like the New Age person who's just been opening their whole life, and every time the wind changes, they have chaos in their life and upset. If they go and do like powerlifting and get really dense, of course this will help ground them. But this way of doing things, I still find a little disconnected. It's still like the density is not talking to the openness, and the openness not talking to the density. They're like two separate things. I'm dense over here, and then I let go of that density completely, and then I'm wide open over here. I'm much more interested in how they relate to each other. This is, in my view, the more interesting thing, the relationship between the opposites. How does the openness talk to the density and relate to the density, and how does the density relate to the openness? So in my view, I'm more interested in like cultivating the little strings that connect the parachute to the open parachute to the dense load. If the more these are interconnected, the more they play on each other and work on each other. And of course, you can increase the density, but you can also open the chute, and then they relate to each other better, and you can glide better, and so on and so forth. So I do look at each one in isolation, but with the broader picture of how do they connect, how do they interconnect, and how do they relate, and how do they unite? How can we make the opposites have connective highways between them that make when you condense more, it opens more, and when you open more, it condenses more, is kind of what we're going to. To get to that, you've got to have a bit of focus on one and the other at certain periods of training. But really, these days, kind of speed running the density is not a bad idea. Just having a big focus on the gathering of the dantian is really not a bad idea, because it will just solve a whole bunch of mundane problems. You'll stop having uncertainties about what you're meant to be doing. You'll know yourself better. You'll feel yourself better. You'll know yourself in space better. You'll know, oh, I'm actually just sitting here in front of a computer talking to no one at the moment, and this recording is going to go out to the greater world a bit later. Cool. I'm very clear on that. You'll know the difference between actual hunger, where your system needs to be fed, and like fake hunger, where it's actually just wanting this density to be filled. You can actually go and do the density practices to resolve that second type of hunger. You'll start to feel very clear. The density is not perfect. It comes and goes a little bit too. It gets established very slowly because it is a yin quality. So it's like filling up a reservoir with an eyedropper. It takes time. The condensing thing is very yin. Yin is slow. You can't speed it up. If you try and speed it up with like weekend cheats and tumo breathing, you'll just mess yourself up. You'll actually just make more of that opening and more chaos. There's just no way to speed up condensation except for doing the long, hard, slow route. So you've just got to condense and drip and keep doing it over a long period of time. Again, this kind of idea of a dehumidifier is really interesting, because if you've ever run a dehumidifier, like at any moment you kind of turn it on for 5 minutes and look in there and there's no water, but you leave it on for the day and the reservoir fills up. It's kind of like this. But you imagine that if you turned it off, that water would just evaporate slowly as well. So whatever you'd gathered slowly disperses, and then you've got to regather it again. So there's a real need for consistency, and consistency over a long period of time to gather this density together to create the yin aspect of the dynamic we're looking for here. So to summarize, you have this idea of density coming from extremity back to center, and the traverse back to center is an act of release, not of force, as if it is falling or being attracted towards a gravity well or like a magnetic field, this idea of drawing things together. And you're also wanting to release the form of the thing you're drawing in. So, if you have a thought, it's not like especially if you have like a dark thought, right? It's not like you're drawing in that darkness. You're not drawing in the concept of the thought forms. You're drawing in the raw awareness, the raw chi. The chi has formed up as a dark thought. You release it from that thought and let it coalesce in the center. This idea is really crucial, like the liquid metal man reforming itself. It's not like he's flicking away the chunks that he doesn't like the look of. He's letting them melt so he comes back together. And then understanding how this dense form actually serves you in the rest of your life. It gives you a sense of protection, of fullness, of clear boundary. You'll know where your skin ends. You actually end up with two boundaries. You have a yin boundary, which is your skin, which you start to feel very clearly the difference between inside your skin and outside. So, you'll be warm inside, walk out into the cold. Oh, there's a clear difference. There's my skin, and outside the skin, there's the environment, and I can feel that it's cold outside and I'm warm inside. More than that, you get, that's like the yin, the manifest boundary, which is the skin. The non-manifest boundary is the wei qi, which can actually grow outside the skin. You can go out, if you really build the wei qi, you can go out to the point where it feels like the cold isn't really even touching your skin. And this works for heat as well. So if the wei qi is really pumping and really dense, then the sun doesn't also hit the skin. I've tested this actually, and built myself up, stayed in the sun for an hour in my practices where my wei qi is generally working better. And then release the practice, the wei qi then kind of runs inside and does its thing, and I ended up burnt in the last 5 minutes. But I was doing my whole practice with my shirt off, and I put my shirt on at the end and walked back to the car, and my forearms got burnt. So yeah, you can protect yourself from the elements with really dense qi as well, but it's also just good for protecting your sense of identity, especially in the modern era where social media is constantly trying to blast that people everywhere have opinions, and you can just hold your opinion without really worrying about if you change it either. You just shift the opinion. It's not a problem. You're not invested in your opinion. You're invested in your density in your center. So then if you need to change your opinion, you just change it, and you're still full of yourself. Those opinions can change, but you're still very, very secure. And it gives you a sense of knowing where you are and where you're going. So for all of these reasons, this anchoring reason, if you're suffering from a super busy ADHD mind, every second person I talk to has ADHD these days, an inability to what? Gather their attention in one place and keep it there. It's the same action that does this density, this forming up of density, releasing from all the distractions and letting things come together is the exact same action. So if you train this density, you'll also fix your focus problems. You'll be able to draw your focus onto one thing and keep it there very, very easily without needing to force things, right? Not needing to cut yourself away. You just release from the other things and you'll naturally gather on your things, and it lets you get stuff done very, very easily too. So plenty of good reasons to work with this, of course, with the caveat that if you only do this, you'll make yourself stagnant. So take care of that. You need to move around and use the body and circulate what you've gathered as well. But until you have something to circulate, it's probably better to focus on the gathering. So I'd really, really highly recommend you find a version of this gathering practice to engage with. If you're really looking for one and you have no idea where to look, go over onto my Patreon. I'm pretty sure there's a practice of the week there somewhere that's called condensing in the lower center or releasing into the lower center or something like this, that you'll be able to have a go at a basic version of this. All of this work, the density and stuff also really prepares you for alchemy if that's something you're interested in. Personally, I haven't gone too deep down the Nadan path. That's a lie. I went reasonably deep in the advanced practices. They didn't work so well because I hadn't gathered enough density. So I'm kind of coming back around to fix those foundational issues and really working on the density at the moment. Hence the podcast about it and the benefits. But more than that, just basic levels of it are so useful for the general population, even if you're not going to go to the whole purification and whatever ideas of and transformation ideas, transmutation ideas of alchemy. Just building some basic density as a practice is super important. You can do it crudely, as I mentioned, with weights and lifting weights and making the muscles dense and things like this, but this has a negative effect when it's not done in relationship to the opening, which most conventional exercise doesn't work that well for that. So I prefer the Neigong methods there. Honestly, of everywhere I've searched, they're the best methods to make things dense. As you go down that path of densification, you also get things like the Jing, the tendon changing, the sinews, the membranes all start to transform. They start to thicken up. They start to kind of, again, have this auto-organization where the system just stays very relaxed. It doesn't enter fight or flight very easily. You really need to, have some very scary person bearing down on you or something like that physically to shock the system. But otherwise, you can stay really relaxed. The news can drop that World War III has landed, which maybe it has, I'm not sure. Or any other shocking thing, and you just go, okay, and you adapt. And it's easy enough when you're occupying yourself, when you have no density, when you're only out in the field and the field changes into chaos, then you get to go along with that chaos, and that's no fun. Build density, it'll do good things for you. As always, you're welcome to contact me for private consultation. I can teach you my version of this stuff at any point, just in a one-on-one. I am very slowly working on the world's longest course for building this up. My other courses have this 8-week format that I really quite like, but it's not long enough. It's not long enough to even get started. So every time I do it, it's kind of padding out by, I've got to add that in and got to do this preparation and so on and so forth. So it's looking like it's probably going to end up as like a 6-month course, which will be better for you in the long run because it means there won't be any shortcutting. As always with my courses, it'll have a lot of follow-alongs and stuff. But I think that's the next big project I'll have. Start of 2026, Firehorse. It might be good to dig into that one and get that one done this year. Let's see how things go. As I have mentioned somewhere, maybe on the last intro to the podcast, I am a new father now, so little bub is occupying a whole lot of my time. Obviously, that makes planning a little difficult for certain things, and the world is in a period of maximum chaos, so that also makes planning pretty difficult, but we'll see how we go. Hopefully this year you're seeing the condensation course. This course is part of my phase 2 work. So phase 1 is a lot of the setting up the structure and building the container. Phase 2 is going to be condensing inside the container, and circulating that condensation. So moving a little closer to actual Qigong work, actual Neigong work, rather than just preparation. So in the meantime, get stuck into all the other courses. You can always find them at courses.craigmallet.com. That's courses.craigmallet.com. And I'll throw a link in the show notes as usual to that. I think that's enough on condensation. I desperately hope you followed that. It's easier to do these talks in person because I can use like hand gestures that show the condensation, and then I can also demonstrate with my physical body this very physical action. But hopefully, just audio wise, you've gotten a vague sense of what I'm trying to convey. And yeah, as usual, just shoot me a message if not, or if you want to clarify anything, or if you just want to comment on it, please feel free to email me. You can always find all my contact details on my website, craigmallett.com/contact. Enjoy, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next podcast.